Hello and welcome to the first episode of the new Week in Nintendo podcast right here on GVG. I'm your host, Steve Bowling, and I'm joined by my brand new co-host for the win, Brandon Miracle. How are you, Brandon?
What's going on? I am here in a Nintendo podcast now.
Oh man, it's like you have no experience doing these. You've never done a Nintendo podcast for several years before.
No, anyone who thinks so is entirely wrong. There's definitely no evidence of it on another YouTube channel that won't be named today. But regardless, I'm happy to be here.
And I'm happy to have you. It's been a long time coming. For those of you that don't know, the Week in Nintendo, in its previous iteration, was available exclusively on Patreon. We had mentioned that we wanted to bring this to YouTube in the future, and we're finally doing it. We've worked out the technical kinks that were in our way, and we're happy to bring this to you. If you like the Week in Nintendo, or maybe you followed us over from the previous iteration on Patreon, you can join our winner's circle over at patreon.com/gvgaming to get episodes early. They come out a day early there. Or if you want to enjoy it for free here on YouTube or on any other podcast service, it launches Saturdays at 9 a.m. Pacific, 12 p.m. Eastern. And I think that's 5 p.m. in the UK. So wherever you are, I hope you're able to join us and enjoy. This is a casual podcast. We just talk about what's going on in the world of Nintendo, what's been happening this week, and what we've been playing, what we've been doing. And this week, we do have one weird ass piece of Nintendo news. Of course, that's the thing everybody on Twitter is talking about. I'm referring, of course, to Emio, the short 15-second, seemingly horror-ish trailer that we got. Brandon, I assume you've run into this already yourself.
Yeah, I've watched it a few times, and I don't know what to make of it. If you know me, you know I'm a fan of horror games, so like this definitely appeals to me. But this is so out of left field for Nintendo. They don't typically do teasers of this variety. So when I woke up and saw this on Twitter and on the Japanese Nintendo Twitter, I was like, what's going on?
Yeah, it's a really interesting way for Nintendo to tease a project. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me because it's not, like you said, in their traditional playbook. They don't usually have these kind of cryptic teaser trailers, especially not ones that lean kind of this far into horror. Now, folks on message boards all over the place have been trying to figure out what this is. I took a deep dive into it myself. I dug through the code of the website. I found nothing. There's no hints, nothing cryptic that I could locate. I did manage to pull out like the actual video files they used for the trailer. I examined those, didn't find anything worth finding. But there is a theory floating around that Bloober Team, the folks that did the Medium, are working on this. This comes from nothing, by the way. This is just strictly from Jaw Muncher, who is the Dino Crisis guy on Twitter, if you know him. But it's just kind of supposition on their part, and it seems like a kind of an alarming number of credible video game sites have run with the theory that it's Bloober Team. I'm not going to give my opinion yet on it, but Brandon, what do you think? Do you think that the folks behind the Medium are involved with this Emio project?
That's hard for me to say. I don't necessarily want to just put stock into a random internet rumor like that. Uh, and we're in an era of Nintendo where they don't even like revealing their developers ahead of time, and I think we've since learned why. In light of these events, uh, but no, I'm gonna go out on a limb and say this is more an internal project. At least I'd like it to be.
Yeah, I mean, at a minimum, it's certainly published by Nintendo. I've heard some people floating that it's full on third party. I don't believe that for a second. Nintendo would not go this far for just about any third party project. It's just unheard of for them to kind of do something this cryptic and be this deeply involved with the marketing if they weren't at least publishing the game. There is the full screen Nintendo logo at the end of the teaser for Emio, which again, Nintendo doesn't do that on third party games. So I think that this is definitely an internal, Nintendo effort. It's really hard to say which studio because, like you said, Brandon, Nintendo is very cagey about this. Even when I previewed Nintendo World Championships, which to me seems very obviously to be a nerd game. Nintendo wouldn't tell me that it was nerd. Nerd, for those of you that don't know, are the folks that did the NSO emulator. So it
I
seems
when you
right.
said nerd, I didn't know you were talking about a developer. I thought you were just calling us nerds.
Oh, no, no, no. No, I should be clear. Nintendo European Research and Development, nerd. Yeah,
Got
they
it.
they developed the NSO emulator. And I was like, "Oh, well, this is a game where you play a bunch of NSO games. So this was clearly made by Nerd, right?" And Nintendo was like, "We're not talking about that. You'll just have to roll credits on the game to find out." But yeah, so going back to Emio for a sec. It feels to me like I agree. It has to be some type of first party effort. I don't think that Nintendo would contract Bloober Team to make something for them and then reveal it with kind of to build up hype for it. Let's say it that way, to build up hype for it in this way, because obviously people are talking. A lot of people are talking, and we thought about recording a discussion, but there's really no info to discuss. There's it's just a guy with a paper bag on his head that occasionally, like the paper bag, changes expressions. It's creepy, but that's really all we have to it. I'm not a spooky game guy, but I'm still very interested because I feel like if Nintendo is developing this in house, who knows what else they could be doing? Because this breaks the mold for them in a number of ways, and I think it's pretty exciting.
This definitely feels like a turning point for Nintendo. Because yeah, they don't do stuff like this. It's super weird. In some ways, it kind of reminds me of the GameCube era where they were trying to take on a more, I guess, badass approach. Um, catering more to the standard core industry. Because doing a teaser like this is something that you'd expect another company to do. Having Nintendo do it is just, I think, is why there's so much attention drawn to it because they don't do it. It doesn't make sense for them.
Yeah, it's really atypical of Nintendo to do a teaser like this, right? I saw people throwing Kojima's name out there, which I don't believe. It would be interesting to see Kojima do a game on a Nintendo platform. Kojima certainly likes horror. He had PT, Silent Hills, and it would make sense for him to do something like that. But he's currently contracted for, I think, both an Xbox and a PlayStation game right now. And Koji Pro Studios is not that big that I think they could have too many more projects in flight currently. Also, maybe it's just me, but I feel like because they're doing this teaser now, one, it's very obviously a current gen Switch game. And two, I think that its release is probably closer than most people think, because if it is a game that's being revealed now before the reveal of the Switch, because these viral marketing campaigns usually don't have like super long tails to them. I anticipate it'll be in the weeks before we find out what Emio is, not months, and certainly not anything more than months. If they did this weird teaser now and then revealed it in 2026, that'd just be very bizarre. So,
Yeah, I mean, you have to also consider that 3 months from now is Halloween, and
right.
they're they're known to release games like this in the Halloween season. We had Bayonetta in October. Luigi's Mansion 3 wasn't that on Halloween
Yeah,
when it
it
came out?
was.
Yeah. Yeah, so like this that part of it would be par for the course. So I definitely expect to see whatever this is pretty soon.
Yeah, I agree. I couldn't agree more. I think that this is a spooky season game, and it will be something that we see more of very soon. Uh, so yeah, I just think this has to be like an internal Nintendo effort, and I'll be excited to see what they reveal with this. But it's definitely Switch One. I saw some people positing that it was like a reveal of the Switch 2, which would be the most hilariously weird way to reveal a console. Like that'd be up there with like the PlayStation 3 floating baby commercial. Like just something that nobody wants. Um, but I do think that this is going to be an effort that we see sooner rather than later. I think Nintendo is going to blow the lid off this one in the next couple of weeks, and we'll find out what Emio is together. Um, but yeah, I don't think there's a whole lot more to discuss on that, just because paper bag dude. What we do have more to discuss about though, and I think we're going to have more of a difference of opinion here, Brandon, is by the time we record the next episode of the win, we'll be playing, or at least I'll be playing, Nintendo World Championships. Nintendo obviously flew me out to preview the game a couple of weeks ago. That preview's been live on the channel for a while. Go ahead and check it out if you want to know what I think of the game. But we'll have the full finished version. And I mentioned it in a previous episode of the older iteration of the win on Patreon, but uh, I think I might be the only one at GVG that's excited for this game.
Yeah, going into your preview, I was really not interested in the game at all. That the reveal of the game pretty much fell flat to me. But that's because Nintendo, for a long time, has been like catering to and pushing like NES stuff, and NES is just so widely available thanks to NSO that it's just not that interesting. We had NES Remix 1 and 2 on Wii U. Like, this is a song and dance we've done before. So it's just not that interesting to me, because it's NES games, which is not to disparage NES games in any way. It's just we've done it so many times. I would much rather this be something like Super Nintendo Edition, or even further, like N64. Like, I've wanted Super Nintendo Remix ever since they did NES Remix, and that never ended up happening. So for us to technically be treading old water again is just a little underwhelming. That said, uh, I helped on the edit on that preview, so I got to really just kind of take a deep look at the game, see it from your perspective, and I did start to change my tune a little bit. I think there is something here that would appeal to me. I just I'm still not sure if it's something I want to spend my money on.
Yeah, and that's something that I mentioned when I did kind of the deeper dive in the preview on Patreon. Was I was talking about the fact that I wonder if Nintendo positioned this game correctly, because I think there's a lot of fun to be had with it. I think that the speed running element of it is interesting, and I've caught myself up in the idea of just trying to make incremental improvements, right? The shaving a hundredth or a tenth of a second off of a time just kind of got addicting after a while, because these are games that we all have extensive experience with, and you go into it telling yourself like, oh man, grab the first mushroom in Mario, no problem, piece of cake. And then you pull up an A rank and you're like, what do you mean this? I didn't get the top score on this. I'm better than this. And you just kind of get into this rhythm of like, I'm going to crush all these challenges because I've played these games so much. Um, but where I think for the first time in a long time, uh, the value proposition is the major issue here. Even at, a discounted, well, it's hard to say discounted, but a budget friendly price of $40, I see people saying like, well, I've bought these NES games over and over and over again. I don't want to buy another product that repackages NES games for me. And that was a common comment we got on the preview.
Mhm.
Just people saying like, NES games aren't worth it to me anymore. I want something new. Um, and I got to wondering if Nintendo had pushed this as an NSO perk rather than a title you have to buy, right? Let's say that they package the collector's edition, which I think is dope. You get the gold NES cart, you get the art cards, you get the pins. I think that's just neat Nintendo merch to have. Let's say they still push that to retail, but then if you're an active NSO expansion pack subscriber, this is just a free experience like Tetris 99. You just get this as part of your subscription. I think people would have responded to that a lot better.
Yeah, I would actively be excited about it. Like, um, these are already games that I have because of the NSO subscription, so there's not much reason to ask me to pay money to buy them. It's also worth noting, and this happened just this week, that uh, Luigi Blood had showed those patents for the, what was it, mission play for NSO, which is obviously something that didn't end up happening, but it was something they were thinking about. And like, they would challenge you to do specific things. There seemed to be like global challenges that you had to compete in. And the games are just tracking like simple things. Like, did you get a one up in Super Mario Brothers? How many times did you jump? Just silly things like that. Um, and that seems to have evolved into this game. Uh, so it's hard to say for certain just based on the patents, but it does seem like this was initially positioned to be part of NSO to begin with. Um, so seeing it swap over to more of a full game experience while I understand why they might wanna do that, just doesn't make much consumer-friendly business sense to me.
Yeah, and I can definitely see it from that angle. I also, it's funny that you brought that up because I was going to bring up those patents as well. Uh, it's such a stellar idea, and I do think that the original idea of packaging it within the NSO app would have been brilliant. Because I don't know about you, but when I go to buy like icons in the NSO app, which I almost never dip into unless there's like an icon pack that I know that I want.
Mhm.
Um, I that's about the only time I look at the missions section of that app, and I'll be like, okay, how do I replace some of the coins I'm about to spend? Oh, I've got to boot up Super Mario World for 30 seconds. I'll go do that and get my free 10 coins or whatever. Um, but the community aspect in those of being like, hey, how many, we've got to kill a billion Goombas as a community. I would have jumped in on that, quite literally jumped in on that and helped out. I think that that would have been a great community building social aspect of NSO, which is something that, you know, I've been saying for a while. Nintendo is sorely lacking. They really need more social interactivity at the OS level in the Switch, because on the Wii U we had Miiverse, and you could jump in there and you know interact with silly posts or look at art or whatever. The Wii U had a very good social platform built in, whereas the Switch kind of got rid of that. And I think that's probably my biggest gripe about the Switch era is that Nintendo kind of regressed in terms of social features in the hardware, and just
Yeah.
I fully expected them to introduce them at some point. We never got them back.
Yeah, when I really look at it holistically, there's not really any way to interact with your friends list other than play games with them or see what they're playing, and that's basically it. And yeah, that kinda sucks.
Yeah, I understand like the reticence for voice chat, and if you asked me in 2017 how I felt about Nintendo not having voice chat, I'd be like, good. I don't like voice chat in games. It's just a way of, spewing toxicity at one another. But in the intervening years since the Switch came out, that my view on that has changed completely. I connect with my friends way more over console voice chat than I did 7 years ago. In fact, for some of my friends, it's like our primary means of communicating with one another. Like we'll hop in a game on PSN or Xbox Live, and it'll basically be a replacement for a phone call, right? Like we'll sit and just chat with each other for hours while we make our way through missions in Helldivers or play Remnant 2 or whatever it is we're into. And if I could do the same thing in Splatoon without having to get a separate app on my phone and then connect and have horrible quality, I would probably it would contribute to me playing for much longer on my Switch than I currently do, because I kind of view my Switch as largely, with some exceptions, a single player machine at this point. Like I play solo games, and if I want to do multiplayer, I generally hop on a different platform just so that I can have the ability to message and chat and do all that other stuff. Right now, my best friend and I are playing through Shadow of the Erd Tree in co-op, and we'll just, if I get hung up on something, I'll screen share with him, and he can watch what I'm doing and give me some advice or vice versa. Um, but it feels like Nintendo has missed a lot of opportunities here to kind of make the Switch experience more social and more shareable. And obviously there are social media platforms that have played into some of that. But I feel like with the Switch 2 coming, I hope that Nintendo renews their focus on being able to connect with other people around you that are sharing those like same gaming experiences.
Yeah, they shouldn't be locked to a game by game basis. Like social features in Splatoon 3 shouldn't be the only way I can interact with my friends list. Monster Hunter Rise was Switch exclusive for a long time, and there's just no voice chat. You just can't. And that's a big bummer. That meant that I would have to plug my Switch um into my Elgato and then run it through OBS and then get into Discord calls so that I could hear game audio and my friends. And I shouldn't I shouldn't have to do that. Um, at the same time, like I look at NES, it's not even NES Remix. See, I'm conflating the two now. Um, I look at World Championship and why are some of the social features in that game, and mind you, there aren't a ton. Um, yeah, why are they only there? Why aren't they, a system level thing?
Yeah, it feels a lot like online strategy from like the 2010s, like the very early 2010s, or even the early, like, what do you call them? The aughts? I don't, I don't know, but um, back when each game had its own bespoke online infrastructure and you had to exist within the confines of that game. And I'm not saying that those concepts don't exist in 2024. They certainly do. Like Helldivers has its own friend list outside of the PSN friend list. Uh, but it's often these days it's more the exception than the rule. Whereas with the Switch, it is still an absolute rule. Like each game has its own kind of inbuilt social infrastructure that you have to live inside of to play that game.
Yeah.
And what that breaks for me is that it's so hard for me to say I see a good friend online playing their Switch and they're playing Mario Kart 8 and I'm playing Splatoon and I want them to play with me. I mean, I can send them an invite, but who's really trained to like go look? You know, who's
It's
Nintendo has just made it so difficult for people to step out of what they're doing and join their friends doing other things.
you can say what you want about like the Wii's online features, but I think back to like the message board. Like you could send people messages on the Wii. It didn't
Yep.
work very well. It was super slow, but it was a feature. You could do voice calls using Wii Speak. Again, quality was horrible, but it was there. I think the only way in that the Wii was worse, besides internet speeds and whatnot, in online was the fact that friend codes were game by game and not system level. That's the only improvement we've made.
Yep. The funny thing is I remember back in the day on the Wii, I would send notes to my friends because if you could I can't remember how you did it anymore, but you could find out the email address of someone's Wii. You could find out like their message. It was basically email, and you could find out the full email address of another person's Wii,
Yeah,
and then
I
you
used
could
to use
mail
that.
them from any mail client. So I would just pull up on my phone and send my friends messages to their Wii message board when I was bored at work. Like I would just send them messages, and it's so weird. I'm glad you brought that up because it's so weird to think about 17 years ago. We had messaging on a Nintendo platform and then never, Nintendo was just like, nah, we don't need that in the 2020s at all. Um,
We got Swap Note on the 3DS if you want to count that, despite how
oh,
horribly that went.
yeah, I was about to say, like, all it took was one bad apple to ruin Swapnote for the whole world. And I mean, come on. I don't know how to feel about that. That's upsetting to me, but it does feel like Nintendo really needs to get with the times. It is interesting to see Nintendo World Championships is coming out, and it has a different set of features to Splatoon 3 to Mario Kart 8. There's no consistency there with how online functions in games. The way Nintendo told it to me at the preview was that they opted not to do full fat like online for Nintendo World Championships because the measurements of time had to be so precise
Mhm.
that they didn't want the chance of lag, introducing even a hundredth of a second delay to where that could skew the results in favor of one person over another. They felt that it was just too messy. And I mean, I guess I could see that. I don't necessarily love the idea of ghost data being the only way to play. Um, I can appreciate that local co-op exists, but I think in a post-COVID world, not a lot of people have local game nights anymore. I think that it's still something that we're all coming back to, just I don't know, but I mean, even outside of COVID and all that, I don't really have like a group of 4 people that I could be like, "Hey, come over and let's play NES games all night." I maybe know like one person in my area that would do that with me. Um, but I
Yeah,
hope that we see kind of a
I can go months here where I live without being able to like pull together like a group thing like that. And yeah, that can get really frustrating. So having online is really important. The person I play online with most lives 6 hours away from me. So like hanging out's not happening.
yeah. In fact, I was supposed to. So for those of you that don't know, and to be fair, there's no reason you should know. It'd be weird if you did. But Xeon from Nintendo Life lives just a handful of hours from my house. We didn't know this until we talked at John's wedding. So we went all the way to the UK to find out we lived 3 hours away from each other. Um, he invited me over for a game night, and I can't make it, unfortunately. I have plans, but I thought about that and I was like, wow, like the next most enthused Nintendo person, because I live far away from everyone else on GVG. Uh, everybody is a minimum of like 10 hours away from me by car. Brandon, you're half a country away. Derek's an entire country away. Ash is at least a 3 hour flight away. Daniel is about the same amount of time. So, the closest person I know that is into this stuff as much as I am is a minimum 3 hour drive from my house. And it got me thinking, like, it'd be nice to be able to have groups to do this. But I also think that times have changed. People are more spread out because the internet has enabled us to be more spread out. Like GVG wouldn't exist without the modern internet, because there's no way
Yeah,
you and I would know each other. We met at E3.
right.
But I never would have met Daniel. We met Daniel through our Discord. Um, I never would have met John, most likely. It's just a lot of it's an interesting set of circumstances where we have these experiences that we can only do because the internet is available. And Nintendo seems to kind of waffle back and forth on how much online connectivity they want in their products and definitely in their software. But I'm hoping with Switch 2, they just kind of fully embrace modernity. Like it's time for built-in voice chat. It's time for being able to share screenshots to friends on the same platform as you without having to go to, copy them down to your phone and then share them on social media. It's time to enable sharing of clips. Like Nintendo needs to build a robust network to share all this stuff onto.
Hmm.
I think it's just kind of what people expect now.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think back to Smash Ultimate, which had its own companion app in the Switch Online phone app for sharing stuff. You could do that stuff in game too, but why should Sakurai and his team have to dedicate man hours to making this stuff themselves when it could just be a global system level thing? It's a waste of developer time if they have to focus on stuff like that. Um, and it just keeps people more divided, which is not what Nintendo's about. Like their whole thing is bringing people together, having fun. I know for a long time they've believed in doing that in the same room, and while I understand that sentiment, it doesn't really apply to places like the US.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that it's just kind of a fact of modern society that people are more spread out, and thus we need those tools to be able to connect with each other. But let me ask you this: I don't want to share my pet theory on this yet, but why do you think it is that Nintendo opted not to put messaging and features like that, social features, into the Switch OS? Because obviously at this point they're never coming to the current version of the Switch that we have. But I'm curious as to your take on why those didn't exist in the first place.
It's it's hard to say because um, you'd think that of all consoles, the Switch would have these features because there's a relatively robust parental controls system built into the console. And if they were worried about what happened with Swap Note happening again here, the protections for that are already in place and are already a part of the system at large. So I don't necessarily know why they wouldn't. I don't know if there's performance issues on the Switch that doesn't even quite sound right to me. Um, I I don't know. I really don't.
Yeah, it's an interesting conundrum. I agree with you on the parental controls. As a parent to two kids, both of whom have Switches, it is really nice how simplified Nintendo has made managing that. Um, it is better than Xbox and far better than PlayStation. PlayStation is probably the worst of the bunch in terms of how you manage parental controls, at least externally to the the console itself. Like if you go in
Mhm.
on your PlayStation console, you can manage them pretty easily, but if you want to manage them on your phone, there's like no app, there's a separate website. PlayStation makes it very difficult. Microsoft's uh got an in-app solution, but it's incredibly obtuse. Like, it's just hard to find and even harder to manage. With the Switch, it's like a separate app just for parental controls, very granular level of control over what your kids have access to and how long they can access any of this stuff. I think it's great. My pet theory on why the Switch does not have what I would consider to be basic social features is that there's not enough horsepower left over. Um, I personally think that, because we've seen other games running on the same processor that's in the Switch in different hardware, right? So like the Tegra X1 was used in Nvidia tablets and stuff like that with nowhere near the level of visual fidelity that we've gotten out of the Switch.
Mhm.
And I think the reason for that is that Nintendo, software wizards that they are, uh, managed to pull off having an operating system on the Switch that just uses minimal as hell resources. That's why you have such snappy recording of screenshots and video clips, right? Because you can mash that screenshot button and your game won't hitch like at all. It'll just keep getting those for you. Um, where the process is significantly even now less cumbersome than current gen consoles. Like it's way quicker to get a screenshot on Switch than it is on PS5 or Series X, which is just crazy.
Yeah.
Um, but I think Nintendo basically reserved like the bare minimum of memory that they needed to, so that they could make as much available to developers as possible to craft these kind of you know stunning experiences on the Switch. Because I've said this many times, and I'm sure you've said it too. But when you look at games like Mario Kart 8, Breath of the Wild, there's still that like, oh wow, how did Nintendo pull this off? Like, what is happening under the hood in this thing that they're able to make this? And I think a lot of that is just they basically let the developers have as much of the resources of this thing as they can, because there are games where it's obviously cutting to like it's got to be using like 90+% of the available memory, because there are games where you just can't take screenshots or video clips, and I assume that has to be because the video memory for it's just not available.
It's also worth noting that if you try to use the Nintendo Switch Online on system app while you're playing a game, it'll oftentimes run like absolute garbage if you're
Yep.
playing a game at the same time. So, yeah, it's the Switch is definitely being pushed. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, I'm curious to see, in a post Switch 1 world where Nintendo kind of allocates that stuff, because obviously there's the need for a generational improvement. And in my view, especially after, almost 8 years of this console, it needs to be a pretty big generational improvement. Like, people aren't going to be happy with like, oh hey, it does 1080p 60 FPS now more consistently. Like, it needs to be an obvious, like, glaring improvement to how games look and feel on new
Yeah,
hardware. I
I'll
think
be
that
perfectly honest with how I feel about it. If we get the new Switch and it's 1080p 60 FPS with no 1440 or perhaps 4K, I won't be happy about that. Like, I don't want to buy another system that is only a marginal upgrade, especially after all this time. Like, this is the longest Nintendo generation console generation we've ever had. Um, I don't do that. That would if you're biting your own like hardcore fans in the butt with something like that, you're doing something wrong.
Yeah, I have to agree there. I feel like you definitely need to see a stark improvement, and I'm curious how they'll pull that off. Obviously, 8 years is an eternity in terms of hardware development time, in terms of the advancements that can occur, and there's a lot we've quote unquote heard. Right, nothing is verified until Nintendo verifies it, of course. But we're hearing DLSS, 4K, fast I/O like the PS5. And I always tell people to reel those expectations back, because what did we hear before the PS5 came out? Lots of stuff. What do we hear before any console comes out? We hear kind of these exaggerated claims. Before the Switch came out, we were hearing that it was PS4 Pro levels of power. There were rumors out there saying that it was going to keep up with the PS4 Pro, which people in the know knew was impossible. But
Yeah.
it's still stands to reason that that's like a big deal, right? You need to basically throw a fistful of salt at any Switch 2 rumors you hear until Nintendo comes out and tells you what this thing's about. Um, but I do think there's some truth to them, right? You kind of have to sift through a lot of stuff to determine what's true and what's not. I think I'm still on the fence about 4K for the Switch 2. I'm on the fence because if it retains anything close to the current size of the current generation Switch, I
Hmm.
mean, all you have to do if you have a PS5 or a PS4 Pro, look at those and see how big they are. And the reason for the size on those is the heat. You know,
Yeah.
4K makes a console hot. And so um I'm curious to see how Nintendo manages that. Of course, you could be doing AI upscaling, which is how I think Nintendo's probably going to hit a lot of performance targets with the Switch 2. Uh, is that they'll use some type of upscaling, which you know PS4 Pro did it, PS5 does it, every console does this now, and to an extent, Switch One does it with like uh, all you gotta do is look at like Mario Odyssey in certain levels, Xenoblade Chronicles. It does more of dynamic resolution shifting than
Yeah.
upscaling, but games go way down to like 240p in some instances just to keep the game running smoothly. Like you'll see it in places.
Yeah. I want to say that Splatoon 3 also used some kind of AI upscaling. I don't remember exactly what it was offhand, um, but I do remember that being part of the conversation when that game was coming out. Um, so if you're listening to this and you know what I'm talking about, leave a comment so that you can remind me. But I'm pretty sure that's true. Uh, yeah, I think AI upscaling like DLSS just makes a lot of sense. This, presumably this will be on NVIDIA hardware where DLSS is. So that would just make sense. I've used DLSS a lot just on my own computer when playing games. It's impressive.
Yeah.
It's like magic.
Yeah, the trade off is definitely there if you're looking. Like you'll see,
Yeah,
certain things are softer, certain things are more pixelated, but the cost to performance ratio on stuff like DLSS is incredible, right? Because you take a game that's running at maybe 15, 20 FPS and suddenly with a marginal, increase in haziness or fuzziness, it's now running at 60 plus. And I think what you trade off for the amount of performance you get is absolutely worth it. And I'd be excited to see that in first party Nintendo games because some things that disappointed me this gen were kind of this was probably the most inconsistent gen performance wise that I've seen from Nintendo. Just in terms of Switch games, first party efforts coming in at an unlocked frame rate, right? Like
yeah.
games with dips, like Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom, Link's Away, lots of Zelda games with inconsistent frame rates this generation. And I'd like to see in this new gen where they focus on having rock solid frame rates for at least their first party games again.
Yeah, there's one game I'd love to go back to. It wasn't developed by Nintendo, but I know you weren't as hot on it as I was. But Age of Calamity, I 100%ed that game. I really enjoyed it, but it ran like absolute doo doo. Um, there's a built-in co-op mode, and I was excited to play it with Michaela, but we were getting sub 10 FPS. Like that's
Yeah,
insane. The fact that they even let that happen, um, it's nuts to me.
yeah, I agree. I would say my biggest issue with Age of Calamity, I don't love the angle they took with the story.
Mhm.
Um, but my bigger issue is the performance. It's really hard for me to play a game that consistently runs very poorly. This is clearly an issue where the game is not well optimized for the Switch or is maybe just too taxing overall. I get confused by it because obviously we had Hyrule Warriors Deluxe DX and
Definitive edition.
yeah, Definitive Edition. Thank you, and that
Mhm.
ran very well. It at least more consistently that it was an enjoyable playable experience. But it put me off kind of Musou games on the Switch almost entirely. Like Persona 5 Tactica, I didn't even bother with. Um, Same developers, same genre, just didn't bother spending my time trying to play it on Switch. Um, even though it looked like a game I'd really want to play. But I hope that these games get updates when the Switch 2 comes out. Uh, but I do want to shift away from Switch 2 talk because obviously we're going to have plenty of that. Or like we're going to be talking Switch 2 for a while. We're going to have presumably before the end of the year some real actual Switch 2 news to discuss. Um, so instead, I'd like to focus on Nintendo's summer to fall lineup because we talked about July, next week with Nintendo World Championships, NES Edition, and
Mhm.
kind of our mixed thoughts on that. But obviously, 2 months from now, we have Zelda Echoes of Wisdom, and I know you have to be excited for that one.
Oh, yeah, everything that game's doing appeals directly to me. I love Link's Awakening, even though the performance on Switch isn't great. Link's Awakening is just one of my favorite Zelda games. I loved playing it on my Game Boy Color as a kid. I didn't even have the DX version. I had the original that I was playing on Game Boy Color,
Nice.
and I loved it. It's a great game. So yeah, just kind of returning to that art direction they used for the Switch remake is cool. I'm glad that they are taking advantage of assets that they already have. Like, I don't need a refresh in every single game. Every 2 or 3 maybe, yeah. But, this is a good utilization of resources. It makes the calendar fill out, especially if you're a Zelda fan, so you're not waiting so long. Um, Very short wait time between this and Tears of the Kingdom, which is great to see. Also, it's borrowing from the kind of open air design of those Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom by kind of giving the player the freedom to approach the game world in whatever way they want, thanks to the what do they call it? Echoes? Or is that the
Yes,
echoes? Okay.
that is the
Um,
Echoes.
I would like there's a it's called Echoes for a reason. I'm gonna find out why. Yeah, but I really like the way that all looks. I think the part that broke my brain in that original trailer was watching Zelda climb over those trees. Because in 2D Zelda, trees are your barriers. That's what they exist to do. So seeing her climb over the top of those trees and completely break traditional game progression is incredibly exciting to me. They mentioned it in the trailer or in the direct that everybody's going to have a unique experience, and even from the little bit that we've seen, I can tell that that's going to be true.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with that more. I think that I was talking over this with a friend, and I phrased it as everything I didn't know I wanted from Zelda. Uh,
It's a good way to put it. Yeah.
and I feel like I had explored this conundrum, as I'm sure many of us have before, about how you take what we've learned about what we enjoy about Zelda, because Breath of the Wild previously was everything I didn't know I wanted about Zelda. Same for Tears of the Kingdom, right? They introduced this level of freedom and experimentation that I just hadn't thought of myself. And I wondered how that would get ported over to the confines of a 2D Zelda game where things are traditionally more restrictive. In 3D it makes sense. Oh, I can push a log. I can stick things together. You have more freedom of movement and thus more freedom to do just just about anything in 3D.
Hmm.
But in 2D, you're walking on basically two axes and you're making your way across a grid, and that still is very true of this new Zelda game. However, you now have, like you said, these echoes that enable you to kind of just break the way things work. Um, I know that in our discussion about this, we were talking about how Ash wanted to see more traditional combat. And I was happy that that wasn't there. I was happy to see that Zelda has to get creative with how she kills enemies rather than just swinging a sword at them. Like in the trailer when she summons a rock in front of between her and an enemy, so he hits the rock and then she lifts it and just throws it at him and takes him out. I love that. I thought that that was such a cool way to do it because I'm like, you could come up with any number of things. Like part of me wondered, could I just trap him in a block of water and he'd drown? What can I do to make my way around stuff? And like you said, climbing on top of trees, making your way around obstacles. Like in traditional 2D Zelda, you're like, oh, I have to find this item to do this. But with Zelda, you could just, well, I can use this echo and solve this right now rather than having to explore a dungeon. I'm deeply excited to see what kind of tricks Nintendo has or what surprises lie in store for this game. And I don't know about you, but I'm also doing my damnedest to make sure I pick up that Zelda themed Switch Lite when that comes out.
I also want to draw attention to the fact that Zelda, when finally getting her own game, she got her own game. Like, it's not
Yep.
just The Legend of Zelda, but you play as Zelda. This is a new take on Zelda that Zelda gets to drive home herself. So, like, we've never played a Zelda game that's quite like this before. She has her own way that she interacts with the world. Um, I got a lot of flack for it, but like, I didn't like Super Princess Peach that
Yeah, you
much. But
did get a lot of heat.
I did, but one of the reasons I don't like that game is because they just made a run of the mill platformer where you play as Peach instead of giving Peach something unique to do. Like, why? Why? Like, that's just a waste of time.
Did
It.
you pull I hate to drive it off topic, but did you play Princess Peach Showtime?
I did, and
What did you make of that? I don't think we've heard your thoughts on that on the channel.
uh, I think it's a good game. I don't think it's a great game, but I love that Peach gets to do her own thing, and they had a lot of fun with that, like having her perform and wear all these different outfits, take on these different roles. Like, she got to do something that was unique to her game, and that's not the experience I had with Super Princess Peach. I just felt like I was playing Yoshi's Island as Princess Peach. Is the way it really broke down for me. So I'm happy in the case of Zelda that she's finally getting her own game, and it's something that will belong to her. You're
Yeah.
doing right by the character by doing that. And I think I failed to drive that point home in my Peach video, was that the larger issue I had is that she finally gets this chance to have her own game, and it felt like they didn't put effort into that. Like, this is a wasted opportunity is the way I see it.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting take. So, you and I don't see Super Princess Peach the same way. I'm a pretty ardent fan of the game. In fact, it's one of those games that I'm missing from my collection. I had to get rid of it over the years, and I really wish I had it back. But I think it is also a byproduct of the difference in our ages, right? Like, I'm significantly older than you. I'm in my 40s. You're a baby. But it calls to mind uh, a discussion we were having right before the show started, where we were kind of discussing the most iconic GBA color. And Ash and I, being very close in age, both feel that it's the glacier color, the clearish blue. In Japan, it was called milky blue. But you and Daniel, who are also very close in age, kind of agree that it's indigo. Um,
Hmm.
and I think that's like a generational difference, right? Like, when I was coming up in the early 2000s, and I went out to the store being a young adult and bought my glacier blue Game Boy Advance. It was the color I saw most often among my peers, people my age. So I think if you asked around like 40-year-olds, like, hey, Game Boy Advance, what color comes into your head when you think of it? I think a lot of people in my age group would say that, whereas a lot of people in your age group would probably side with the indigo color because you probably saw it more marketed toward you, or in more marketing that was aimed at you at that time, right?
Yeah,
Um,
I think that's a good point. I think it's
eh,
also worth noting, just for the comedy of it, that there is an Indigo Game Boy Advance in your background.
there is not.
Is not?
This is Midnight, and it is a Japan exclusive
Ah,
color.
okay.
Yeah, I got this as a Christmas gift, but it does look remarkably like an Indigo Game Boy Advance. And I own an Indigo GameCube. But more importantly, my point is that I think the reason Super Princess Peach hits for me is because at the time in 2000, what was it, 4 or 5, when that game came out,
Yeah.
um, I don't think people could think beyond uh, Peach just getting her own Mario-like game. I think that these days we've had better, stronger examples of how to do a character game right, like Luigi's Mansion, that becoming a series instead of a one-off, stuff like that. We've had better, stronger cases of here's what you do to make a side character, quote unquote, stand out. And I agree that Princess Peach Showtime is the superior game. I like it a lot more. And I'm excited that Zelda has her own vehicle that, like you said, is not a new is not a just a character swap. But I think in 20 years ago, I would have been just thrilled that Zelda was swinging a sword around. But these days, I think it is cool that they've created a new hook, something more interesting, something more compelling to give her as a vehicle. So
Yeah,
I'm happy.
I think that's a good point because I didn't play Super Princess Peach as a kid. I didn't have it. So when I went to go play it, I decided to pick it up and play it because Princess Peach Showtime was coming out. So I just wanted to know what it was like. So having the 2024 perspective that I did made that game look a lot worse to me, and
Yeah,
uh, I got a lot of a lot of responses about that.
I think I talked about this in my Luigi's Mansion 2 HD hands-on video, preview video, whatever you want to call it. The video I did about that. That the context of when you experience a game is a huge factor in how you perceive it.
Hmm.
And in 2013, when Luigi's Mansion 1 came out, or Luigi's Mansion 2 came out on the 3DS, I was afraid that this was just the direction the franchise would go, and for that, it soured my opinion of the game overall. But in a post Luigi's Mansion 3 world, revisiting that game, I now see it as like a breath of fresh air, something that's very different and new for the franchise as a whole, and I can appreciate it that much more because now I kind of understand better that this was just a concept that they used and they built something really fresh and unique and then kind of shuffled back towards more the way I want the franchise to go. And I think without those underlying perceptions, that it's a much stronger experience. And I think that whatever we bring into a game colors our view of it, whether that's nostalgia in my case with Super Princess Peach, or a fresh set of eyes in yours, having had frankly much better experiences, before going into this.
Yeah, it's interesting that we've gotten into this topic too, because like I did that video about giving games a second chance, and one of the points I'd wanted to drive home about that was just your perspective going into a game and in evaluating why it may not land for you. Um, so this was Super Princess Peach therapy for me, so I appreciate that.
Yeah, and I think it's always interesting. I don't think that there's anything wrong, right, with not enjoying a game. I
Yeah,
think that it's okay to play a game and really thoroughly examine how you feel about it and be like, you know what, wasn't for me, didn't enjoy it. But I agree with your overall thesis in that video, that it is really common to bring a game home, try it, and just be like, nope. You give it 30 minutes and nope out of it. And you might have missed something that, like you said with Monster Hunter, is transformative to who you are as a person. Something that ultimately will be an experience, a game that sticks with you for the rest of your life. Uh, and I find that to be, that it's given me a compelling reason to go back and revisit some games that people have told me that I would love that I just decided I didn't. Right. Um, but
yeah.
I still want to try Persona 5, Nier Automata. I didn't necessarily bounce off those, but I didn't find the hook that drew me in to finish them either.
Which is funny because, like in my video, I say that I did bounce off Near Automata, um, real hard, real fast. But yeah, I came back to it, and that's a game that has stuck with me ever since. You'd be surprised what games land with you when they don't at first. It's there's something kind of magical about it, to be honest.
Yeah. I can think of a few games that I've played in my past that I have initially not had the best time with, and then just they became something more for me the more I played it. Um, and I've recently gotten into the Remnant series, which is a game that I didn't think I'd be talking about, but my best friend just wanted to play this game with me, and he was like, "Please, just kind of soldier through it, let's do this." And I just want to have somebody to play this with. And it became we next thing I knew, we were playing it every Thursday night for months on end, and I fell in love with it. I truly enjoyed those games. And I'm still playing Remnant 2 with him every week as we speak. So I think that the more well, the less you bring into a game, technically, the better, right? The more you can divest yourself of external influences and sit down and play a game and try it, the more you're likely to have a at least a more nuanced take on it, right? Uh,
Yeah.
I got a lot of heat for liking Zenless Zone Zero because gotcha games, and I'll admit, like, and I wish I'd communicated this better in my video too, but um, gotcha games are not something that I am traditionally a fan of. It's not something that I would enjoy, but Daniel's enthusiasm for all things Hoyoverse is pretty infectious. Like the way he talks about it, I'm like, I need to give these a shot. I never would have tried Genshin Impact if not for Daniel telling us repeatedly like how much he loves it, how good it is. And I gave that a try and I played it for a few hours and it just wasn't for me. It didn't hit for me, but seeing Daniel consistently be excited about these games just it got me into the idea of trying more of them. And so when Zenless came out, I saw the gameplay and I was like, that looks like something I'd enjoy. And I'm like 30 hours deep into that game and it's only like 5 days old. So clearly they did something right. And I just think that it's if I had just said, oh, gotcha game, I don't like gotcha games, I wouldn't have had a good time with that either. There are definitely aspects of every game that you either like or dislike, and there are things that you can choose to engage with or ignore, especially in games with multiple overlapping systems. But overall, I think it's just a good idea to kind of try to go into games with an open mind. And I think if you do that, you'll have the best possible experience.
Yeah, to kind of rope this back more Nintendo-y, like I have a friend um who primarily we play Monster Hunter together. Like that's our big thing that we do. Um uh but he was a PlayStation kid growing up, so he didn't really play a lot of Nintendo games. There's a few that he's played that he loves, like Wind Waker, Mario and Luigi Superstar Saga he really enjoyed.
Great
Um
choices.
yeah, but he didn't really have enough exposure to the rest of them, so he just kind of wrote them off. Um but every time we get the opportunity to hang out, like I said before, there's like a 6-hour drive between us. Um we try to play some Nintendo games he hasn't given a shot before. Like in the lead up to Pikmin 4, I was like, Pikmin 3 on Switch has full co-op. Let's see if you like it. And we played the entire game just together like in a couple days and we had a great time. That got him to try the Pikmin 4 demo, which he loved. He still hasn't gotten the full game yet, but he still intends to. Um
Nice.
and it's kind of beautiful to see people kind of open up to things that they weren't open to before when it comes
Yeah.
to video games. Um so if you're looking at Zelda Echoes of Wisdom and you don't want to get it because it's not a completely traditional Zelda game, don't think that way. Just try it.
Yeah, I think that that's a good way to look at it. I will say that one of our executive producers for a while had me playing Monster Hunter with them every month, and it got me more invested in Monster Hunter than I think I ever had been in my life. Like I enjoyed the hell out of Rise, and I ended up buying Sunbreak even without the member of our community prodding me on to do so. I just picked it up. Um, and I'm still not,
Heck
I
yeah.
wouldn't call myself a dyed in the wool fan yet, but I will say that I'm watching the releases of the series with much more interest than I did prior to that.
Oh, trust
Um,
me, when Wilds comes out, you're gonna see a side of me you've never seen before.
Brandon's wild side. So to close out, and this is something I traditionally do at the beginning of an episode rather than the end. But I didn't think to because this is the first episode and we're still working out the kinks. What have you been playing lately?
So in terms of Nintendo games, I've been playing quite a bit of Super Monkey Ball, um, Banana Rumble. I I'm not like a big Monkey Ball guy. Not that I dislike the games. It's just I didn't have the first two games on GameCube back in the day, so I didn't really get to experience Monkey Ball proper um, until the remake before this game, Banana Mania, um, which I enjoyed, but I didn't like dive completely in. I was enjoying myself, but it wasn't something that I was going to keep my eye on forever. But then something about Banana Rumble, whether it's the new art direction or just the fact that it was legitimately a new game, I don't know. something got me. So I was like, all right, I'll pick the game up, and I'm just loving the heck out of it, man. It's
Nice.
got great gameplay. I'm not, like I said, I'm not a seasoned monkey ball guy, so I don't really know how it compares in terms of like the physics and the level design. But I just want to keep playing. I'm really enjoying it. Uh, John did a great video on Banana Rumble, which also helped me to decide to dive in and get it. I haven't played much of the multiplayer modes yet, which I heard aren't that great, but I'd still like to try them. Um, but at the very least, the core story mode of Banana Rumble is super fun. All the monkeys have their different stats, so you can approach levels in different ways. Um, they have like timers that you can try to hit if you want to go fast. There's missions to collect a certain amount of bananas, and there's also a golden banana in every level. So there's 4 objectives per level that you can try and achieve. You don't have to do them all at once. So like if you want to just beat the level and move on and come back later, you can do that. But I've been finding myself like grinding out each level all the way through before I move on. And no matter how many times I fall off and die, I'm just ready to get back in and try again. It's really rewarding in that way.
Yeah. I've been playing not I've picked up Banana Rumble, but I haven't even started it yet, which is shameful. I need to fix that. But I've been playing Luigi's Mansion 2. That's been taking most of my attention on the Switch. Admittedly, because I'm working on a number of videos at the moment, I haven't had a bunch of time to play really anything that
Mhm.
isn't for a video. And my Luigi's Mansion 2 video has been out for a while. Um, but that's been kind of my main focus. Next week is obviously NES World Championships, which I'll be playing to prep a video on. And I'm very excited to get my hands on that as well as the little collector's edition for that. Um, but I've been seeing your enthusiasm, yours and John's for Banana Rumble, and I really want to give it a shot. Like it's just sitting there on my home screen waiting to be played, and I keep telling myself I'm going to jump in. I did have, I never owned 2, but I owned the original Super Monkey Ball. I should say I still own it. It's behind me right now. Um, and then I had one on the Wii, which I can't remember if the reputation for that was good or not. I enjoyed it. I really liked it. The idea of moving the monkey with the Wii remote. I missed the Wii remote so much, but
That
those.
was the first one they remade on Switch,
Oh, okay. I
um,
was gonna.
which I can't remember the name of right now. It's Banana something.
Yeah, it's Sega sent me a crate of foam bananas when that came out, and that was a nightmare all its own. Like they just sent me a wooden crate with a bunch of foam bananas inside and a physical copy of the game in the bottom, which was a cool way to get a game. But my kids were toddlers back then, and
Uh-oh.
they were like trying to eat the bananas. So,
Uh-oh. Not
yeah,
not
no
not
trips
good.
to the ER were made.
No, that's good.
Yeah,
I would be
but
remiss to mention,
oh yeah,
or if I didn't mention, that Switch Sports just got an update. Uh,
yes,
this is a
basketball.
game. Yeah, this is a game I like a lot more than most people. um, Another game that I think John also likes more than most people. We share that. Uh,
Yes.
Wii Sports Resort. One of my favorite games on the Wii. Basketball was my favorite sport in that game.
Yes, I used to play horse for days.
I love basketball and Wii Sports Resort. So the fact that they added basketball to Switch Sports out of nowhere was amazing, and I got to play it for a little bit. I made an appearance in a video on Yoshiller's channel playing multiplayer with him and a few others,
Nice.
and I'm happy to report that they literally just made the same game as the one in Wii Sports Resort. It works exactly the same. I've seen some people saying that they don't like it, and I'm like, I don't know. This is the same game I played as a kid, and I'm loving it. Uh, so definitely wanted to mention that.
Nice. Well, I think that's going to do it for us for the first episode of the Week in Nintendo here on YouTube and on podcast services, if that's where you're listening to us. If you'd like to support the podcast, you can head over to patreon.com/gvgaming, where by joining our live audience tier for just $5 a month, you get these episodes a day early. They'll appear in audio form on our Patreon site for you to listen to in your favorite podcast app. But if you'd like to just stick here with the free version, that comes out Saturday mornings at 9 a.m. Pacific each and every week. But thank you guys so much for watching or for listening. We appreciate all the support you give us. And that's going to be it until next week. I hope you're happy, safe and healthy wherever you are. And we'll see you next time.
Kisses.
Bye.
Bye.